Hi, ladies and gentlemen. Today we're going to draw a cube. Let's start off with some notes for the cube. First thing to keep in mind when you are drawing this cube is to remember perspective, ladies and gentlemen. Perspective is important because, as you know, we did a whole project on drawing perspective. It is the illusion of space and depth that we are after in that drawing, and we will be doing the same with the cube. When we did the drawings of two-point perspective, we were basically drawing boxes, and that's the same kind of situation we're in with this project. Making a realistic cube, you will need to keep in mind that as things recede into space, they get smaller, and items like that. Now, there's not specifically a horizon line and a vanishing point for this, but it will be something to keep in mind. Next bit of notes, all lines or edges will recede, will appear to recede, to a vanishing point. Now again, I don't think in this situation that we're going to be setting up a horizon line with vanishing points, but it is important to realize that connection between drawing perspective and drawing this cube. Last bit of notes, there will be 3 flat planes in this drawing of a cube, and they will have 3 distinct values. So the flat planes will create 3 distinct values. And by that I mean each side of the cube will be a different value. You'll have one that's light, one that's medium, one that's dark. In this situation, when it's in real life, obviously your light source will create different effects of light. But in our drawing for today, we will have 3 distinct sides of a cube that are visible, and they will all have different values. So let's start drawing the cube. Those are our notes. Now I'm going to put a couple examples down here of things that I don't think that would be helpful, things that are on the do not list. And I think the first thing is that elementary style cube, where you draw 2 overlapping squares and then you just connect the corners. Sure, yeah, that does create a cube, but we're going to try to go a step further with that and create one that looks more realistic, because there's going to be different sides of the cube that you have to see. So how do you do that when you're just drawing overlapping squares? It's a little harder. So we are going to create a cube, and I'm just going to do a couple measurements here. Now, your measurements might be different if you're drawing this at a different size, so you may have to do adjustments, but I'm going to be starting by measuring in from the left side of the paper, just so I know that the side of my cube is straight. And I'm measuring in 2 inches, and I'm just going to make a dot. And I'm going to measure down. I'm going to go down a little further. Again, I'm not really keeping track of how far down that is, but I know that it's 2 inches from there, so I know that it's going to be straight. Okay, and once I do that, I can go ahead and connect those. That'll be the first side of the cube. And what I'm doing is I'm using the ruler to actually measure that side of the cube. So I went from 3 to 6 there, so I know that my line is 3 inches long. 1, 2, 3. And it's 2 inches from there, so I know that it's 2 inches from here and it's 3 inches long. That's a really nice, even, straight line there. And I'm going to keep going. That's just the first side. Of course, at any point during this drawing, You are welcome to pause the video and go back if you need a part repeated, but I am going to go fairly quickly. Just know that at any point you can, turn this off or pause it and continue at your own pace. So I made 2 more dots, and those are both 2 inches from that first one. I'm going to go ahead and create another line here. Okay. I am also using a 6B pencil. I know that that's kind of dark for this initial drawing, but it's just so that you can see it better. Okay, I'm going to keep going. I'm going to measure and actually make the final side of the cube here. Again, 2 inches from that one. So these are all sort of even. We'll go to 6 here, 6 inches away from the left side. And I'll create a nice straight line there. Okay. Looking pretty good. We got our 3 sides, 3 lines here, and those are going to set up our 3 different sides. And we know that those are parallel too, because we have evenly spaced, nicely measured lines. And if extended, they would never meet. So those 3 lines are parallel. In fact, the cube is going to be set up with 3 sets of 3 parallel lines. So, next step, I want to make sure that the cube is all the same height. So I'm going to make sure that my lines are 3 inches tall. In fact, actually, because I made these 2 inches wide, I'm going to change that and make them 2 inches tall. So let's measure this, and I'm going to erase the parts I don't need. So 2 inches there, and I'm just going to erase what's underneath there. And the center of the cube, this line that's in the center is actually going to be lower than the other 2, and that's only to show both sides at the same time, and then the top. So I'm going to make sure that that one is 2 inches as well, but I'm going to lower it. I'm going to make it lower than the other 2, and I'm going to start, it's not really a huge issue how much lower. The lower it is, the more of the top you will see in the end product. So I just lowered it a little bit and erased the excess. And I also made sure that it was 2 inches tall, just like the other one. Okay. Again, the lower it is, the more of the top you will see later. Now I'm going to make this one the same as that one over there. It is 2 inches tall, but I also want to measure down and make sure that it's the same height from the top of the paper. So it looks like it's at 2 3/4 there. I'm going to go over here and make sure that it is at the same height. Just need to add a little bit. And then I'm going to make sure that that line is 2 inches as well. And I'll erase the excess there. Again, I wanted to set up my lines so that they were parallel in that first step. And now that I know that they're parallel, I wanted to make them even as far as their heights. So now we have 3 lines that are the same, 2 inches tall and 2 inches from each other. So I'm going to now connect the bottom on the left side. And you can do the same with your drawing. And once I'm done that, I am going to then continue up to the top. Now you'll notice that since you made these lines nice and even, you can just slide up to the top there with your ruler, and this line will be parallel to the one you just made. It's a nice looking side of the cube there. Now I'm going to hop over to this side only to illustrate that it is also parallel to those 2 that you just made. So I know I just put my ruler here, but now I'm going to slide over to this side, and this line over here will be parallel to that line right there. So sliding my ruler over, and this line on this side will be parallel to that line that we just made. I want to make sure though that it is parallel. Otherwise it may look a little strange once you go to create the final side. Okay, looking good. Next step, finish off the right side. These should be parallel as well. And final, closing off the top, making sure this is also parallel. It is kind of hard to slide your ruler and to see the other side at the same time. So I always like to keep my ruler above this line while I'm doing this. Slide over so you can kind of see that it, make sure that it's parallel, and then create that line. And there's just a little left there, so I'll erase that. And there we go. Our cube is drawn. We have a nice even cube. And we're ready to shade. So in this situation, we are going to make our light source come from the top left. So I'm going to put a little star there. You don't necessarily have to put that on your paper if you can remember which side your light source is coming from. So with our light source being over here, the shadow will come out this way then. And what you can do is, in this situation, since this one's like nice and controlled and even, our light source being over here, our shadow will point the opposite direction. So I'm going to keep my shadow in line with the base of the cube, which means I'm just going to lay my ruler right here and extend that line. That's going to be where our shadow falls. Once I have that, I can now put the shadow line on the opposite side. And what we would do is we would extend this side if we could see it. We can't see it, however, so we just have to kind of slide our ruler like we did before and make sure that this side is parallel to the front line of the shadow, okay? So now we have where our shadow will be. So the one thing I think I stress a lot in these drawings is the fact that the outlines are not necessarily that useful. When we go to shade these, you don't want a heavy outline on the item or it will look flat. I know that I've drawn fairly dark here, but what you want to do is make sure that your lines are light because some of them may end up disappearing. So I'm going to shade this and go a little quicker here. This side's going to be a medium. With our light source being in the top left, the top is going to be blank white, the left side's going to be a medium, the right side's going to be dark. So what I'm going to do is go through the shading fairly quickly. You guys know how to shade. You have done this before. There are techniques that you can use to make sure that your shading looks smooth. Some of those include cross-hatching. You'll notice now that I'm rotating the paper, and I'm just kind of doing that so I can fill up evenly, but I'm also doing that so my hand doesn't drag through the shading and make a big mess. Left-handers, I know you guys will know what I'm talking about there. So I'm just going back and forth different directions here, filling up with a medium shading. I would expect this side of the cube to be about a 35% shaded. If you were thinking about this in percentage, like 100% being pure black, 0 being pure white. It's a nice even application of value, no dark spots, and no scratchiness. If you're getting that scratchiness, try using a B pencil, and using the cross-hatching should smooth it out for you. In fact, I'm going to combine that with my regular mechanical pencil, which we know is an HB pencil right in the middle. You know, the B pencils are the dark ones, the H pencils are the light ones. 6H would be the lightest, 6B would be the darkest. And then I'll move on to the dark side. You'll notice that the outline is starting to fade a little bit, and that's only because I'm bringing the shading right up to the edge, but you can also use a kneaded eraser if those outlines are really dark to lift value off the paper. In fact, mine are so dark that I'm going to just use a regular white rubber eraser and try to get that nice and clean and light, especially the top one, because that one's going to be nearly invisible by the end. In fact, all of them will be. All right, I'm going to lighten up those shadow outlines as well, just a little bit. I can still see them, but I don't want to see them in the end. Okay, fill up the dark side now, and I'm going to imagine that this would be probably about an 85% shaded region if that's on a 100-point percentage scale. And I'm going fairly quickly through this, but I do want you guys to realize that the shading should be smooth, even application. And it should be recognizably darker than the first one, okay? You can see I was using my pencil more like a scoop, like holding it like this, using more of the side of the pencil. What that does is it also helps broaden the surface area of the point of the pencil and where it touches the paper. So if you have a more direct contact with the paper, your lines will be, or your shading will be, probably feature more lines. I like using the side of the pencil because it increases the surface area of the lead that touches the paper, therefore making it a little less likely to be scratchy. Okay, it's looking pretty good. You can always do a self-assessment there by squinting and looking at your shading or lifting up your glasses so you see less detail. And what that does is it sort of allows you to see, are there any spots that have any sudden jumps? You know, are there any dark spots within your shading? Are there any light spots within your shading? All that stuff. Notice I have not done any finger smearing yet in this drawing at all, in fact. Now, the shadow is going to be darkest where it's next to the cube, obviously, because that's the spot that receives almost no light. So if there is a spot that's 100%, it would be immediately next to the cube right here. So I'm filling that up pretty deep and dark with the 6B pencil. And then I'm lightening up on the pressure sensitivity so that I can start to fade fairly quickly. Now, you would fade evenly, so I would say, you know, like this, you would fade this way as it went out away from the cube. And I'm going to switch to my regular pencil so I can get a nice even fade gradation on this one. And you'll notice that now the outline of the shadow is now starting to disappear because we are filling that up to the edge with value. And I have a 4H pencil here, so I'm going to finish it off with that. Again, using, more of the side of the pencil to get an increased surface area of the lead touching the paper. And I'm doing cross hatching the entire time. You'll notice the paper keeps rotating, and that's just so I can vary up the hatching that I'm using on this. Again, if you vary up the hatching, you will basically confuse the viewer as to which way your hand was moving, and therefore your value will be a little softer. I'll finish that off by touching up with a little kneaded eraser just to fade out the end. A little bit more, and that looks pretty good. So now I'm ready to give the final touch, and of course we want to make sure that our cube is established by value differences, meaning this value is different from this value. That is much darker, that is a medium, and that is a light. We don't need any lines distinguishing that form at any point. We just use the value differences. This value is different from that, therefore we don't need an outline. This value is different from that, therefore we don't need an outline. So now this value needs to be different from the background so that we can see that. Now we want our top to remain blank white. So what are we going to do? We are going to give the top outside of the cube a slight atmosphere, a little bit of a haze, like this. And what that's going to do is it's going to allow the value differences to show the top of this clean white cube. I'm doing this with a 4H pencil, just a light haze outside of the cube. Doing a little bit of cross hatching there to soften up that haze because we don't want it to be too scratchy. And if there was ever a moment where you were allowed to use finger smearing, this would be that moment. So I'm going to use my finger and I'm just going to blend in that 4H shading that I just added just to give the top a little bit of atmosphere outside of the cube so that the top of the cube is established with value differences and not an outline. So I'm going back in to clean up the top there, make sure that's nice and even, erase out any little stray marks, nice clean edge. Try not to smear. And just make sure that line is nice and crisp and clean. And that should do it. There we go, ladies and gentlemen. There's your cube.